Welcome to On the Spectrum. I'm your host, Terri Matthews, and this is the show where we inform you, entertain you, and yes, educate you about all things autism. We like to call it prescription TV. Joining us today on Let's Talk is our in-house expert and speech pathologist, Kim. So she's going to be sharing with us all things speech, because this is a hot topic that every parent wants to know, whether you have a verbal or nonverbal kid. So Kim.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
So this is a subject I think that's probably one of our hottest topics. We have so many families because communication is such a big issue.
It's a foundation.
And you are the expert at this. And how we communicate, whether we are autistic or not, is extremely important. It's how we get along in life.
Absolutely.
Period, right?
Yep. Yes, it is.
So I want to ask you something. What is the role of a speech pathologist when working with an individual with autism?
So a speech pathologist is someone who's typically part of a team, and their job is to look at communication and look at understanding language, how individuals express language, understanding how they use their language in a social way, and we also look at other things which people most associate us with is speech production, right? How we form sounds, and another aspect that we typically look at is also feeding and how how individuals are eating and how well that's working, because that's an issue. Feeding, yes, we do that in the
feeding.
Yep.
So how does feeding work with speech?
Well, it's the same anatomy, right?
Oh yeah,
right. Same anatomy, and so that kind of ties it in. It's an area that we're familiar with and that we've learned and that we've studied. So it's kind of was like a natural segue for us to be really looking at and talking about what happens when individuals eat.
So this is important because oftentimes some of our families that we've had an opportunity to talk with, some of them have access to resources such as a speech pathologist through their school. Some families go out on their own, or they want additional speech therapy. And I think it's extremely important, especially for our audience members out there, to really understand what is it that we should be looking for in a speech therapist, because I think we need to clarify that not all speech therapists service autistic kids, right? Or adults.
Or adults. Speech pathology is a very, very broad field. I mean, we service individuals from birth all the way up through the continuum of life. So yes, you want to really ask some questions and talk about and make sure that the speech pathologist that your child or individual or young adult is working with has some understanding and expertise in that area. What we would look for, what I would suggest people look for first and foremost, is make sure that the speech pathologist is certified and licensed. Okay, that's a very important piece.
The most important piece.
Yep. A licensed and certified speech pathologist is a very important piece of that. Second, I would say every child is different, and we know that, right? So what you want to do is look at what your individual needs of your child or young adult are, and then try to talk to a speech pathologist about what their particular expertise might be. So, for example, if your child is having difficulties with pragmatics or social language, then it's going to be important that the speech pathologist has an understanding of that, okay, and how language is used. For our folks who are nonverbal or have minimal verbal skills, we really want someone who has some understanding of what we call augmentative communication or alternative communication.
Augmentative or alternative communication. That's important.
That is important. Yes, it is. So the individual speech pathologist should have some kind of understanding about how to support communication based on some of those skill sets of being able to use visuals, as we've talked about, to look at low-tech options and high-tech options that are available for those individuals who are minimal communicators. So that would be something that would be a skill set. And as I mentioned already, feeding. The individual, not every speech pathologist is comfortable or has that interest and has that scope to be able to work in very specific situations with individuals who have feeding issues. So asking those questions and talking to a team. Another thing that I would say, and I think this is actually one of the most important pieces, is that individual a collaborator? Are they going to work with the rest of the team? Yes. Are they going to be able to communicate with the rest of the team? Are they a team player? Do they understand the role of a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a special education teacher, and most importantly, the parent? Are they going to partner with you and work with you so that you can look at it from a really good collaborative team perspective?
So let me say this. Okay, so with our kiddos, which is why I try to encourage all parents, not that we want everybody to be diagnosed with autism, but I always say, listen, if you have to have your kid go see a doctor and your child is diagnosed with autism, it's not like they pump our kids full of drugs. They pump them full of things like speech therapy.
Right,
you know what I
right,
mean?
right, right.
And is there such a thing as ODing on speech therapy? Can you get too much speech therapy? Could it have a reverse effect or a bad effect on your child?
Well, and I think that's a really good question. I think that's a great question. I think what you have to do is you have to step back and look at your child and look at the overall big picture. Again, looking at it from a team perspective. Maybe, if, in talking about ODing on speech, maybe it's a situation where that's not necessarily all your child needs. Your child may need support from a physical therapist to help with motor planning. Your child may need support from an occupational therapist to, help them organize themselves and, from a sensory perspective and have that sensory organization. They might have needs from a behavioral, specialist. So you want to be able to balance so that it meets the needs of the child. So yes, do I think sometimes that, people can come in and say, I want, 100 hours of speech therapy because that's going to fix it. Not necessarily, right? It's a team approach, and it's you have to really look at each child individually.
Well, I'm glad you said that. And just to kind of clarify what I was kind of asking out there is because when Jaden was first diagnosed, the doctor had told us, listen, if you had all the money in the world or no money at all, where I would tell you to put all your money at, especially because he was nonverbal, was speech. Let's start there first, because if you can work on his ability to communicate, whatever those utilizing devices or pictures or different types of verbal skills that he would end up learning, whatever it is that would put him in a better place where his behaviors would change because he would be able to communicate his needs. My point in saying that is a lot of parents out there are often scared to get a diagnosis because sometimes they think their kid's going to be pumped full of drugs, and that's not the case. They're going to be pumped full of different types of therapies, and it's not going to push them over the edge or create a reverse effect. But also, sometimes when we do have a kid that's diagnosed with autism, and then we come to someone like you and go, I need 100 hours of speech a week, and then after doing this for 6 months, we're like, he's still not speaking, or she's still not speaking. You're like, listen, this is not the fix-all. So it's a combination of therapies that should be utilized.
Absolutely, and I also think too, it's going to look different depending on where your child's at along that continuum, or where your young adult is at. So I think that your doctor giving you that advice, saying this is what we are seeing as his really primary issue right now. So I would put all your energies into that at this moment. Whether it worked, I'm not sure. It seems to have worked. He's talking beautifully, right?
Something's worked for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And then maybe then you back off on speech, and then you're looking at supporting in other ways. So it really is, again, a very, very individualized process, and that's what I think. Again, working with a speech language pathologist who sees that, understands that, wants to work with you and with the team. I really think that's the key.
So let me just say this too. That I think it's important for parents to understand out there. Don't compare your kids. My child might have 30 hours of speech a week, and your kid might have 100. Mine might speak, yours might not. Each kid, it's individualized. They will learn and grow and become their best personal self at their own pace. So I think that that's important. And before I let you go out of here, let me just say this. What would you say to a parent that has a nonverbal child? What should they focus on in reference to speech? And because I would love to have you move in, but that might not be feasibly possible, and your family might hate me if I tried to do that. So my question to you is, for the viewers out there, what can they actually do to implement or do some of these strategies at home so they can help their child be able to speak a little better or at least communicate non-verbally?
Yes, and one of the ways that I try to work with families is we talk about what are their priorities, right? The priority may be at a particular moment that they are having increased behaviors, the kids are really struggling. So we want to reduce that frustration. So it might be looking at providing some functional communication pieces or some augmentative communication. There's that word, right? That we just talked about, right? Augmentative communication, some supports to help them communicate and reduce that frustration. And actually what the research tells us is by helping kids use augmented communication systems and providing that, by reducing that frustration, it actually supports and helps speech development. So, I always say it's like a two-pronged process. We're going to work on speech, the production. We're going to always be modeling and supporting language. And then in conjunction with that, we're also going to be looking at how is your child functioning and how are they communicating in their environments and on a daily basis so they can be part of life.
So let me just say this. I want to make sure people understand when she's saying modeling, she's not meaning like this.
Yeah.
Not this kind of modeling, but you're saying in reference to how we speak or how we behave, right? How we
Absolutely.
Okay.
Like how you speak, and then that way you're providing your child with a model of language that supports them to help them along in that process. Yes.
So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Speech is one of those questions we get so many times from our viewers, and they're always interested because every parent wants their kid to communicate. I think Jaden was 4 or 5 years old before I would hear his voice. And, I thought those first words would have been mommy. They were Target. Target, you owe me
It was
a check.
very meaningful for him.
He knew that's where he wanted to go. Target, Target, Target. That's all he ever said. But, at the same time, I was so grateful to hear him speak.
Yeah,
so I thank
absolutely.
you.
You're welcome.
I thank people like you, especially who are out there and have the level of courage to work with families day in and day out, because sometimes it seems like our kiddos move forward and then sometimes it seems like they move backwards.
It's a journey. It's a journey, that's for sure.
It's definitely not a sprint.
No.
Thank you again for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So we hope on this segment of Let's Talk you found this information very valuable. For more information or shows like these, please log on to www.onthespectrum.tv. And don't miss a show by simply subscribing to our YouTube channel. That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us and see you next time on The Spectrum.